Welcome to another episode of the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. A progressive insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining podcast designed to shine a light on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters, located in his attic, here's the award-winning Pat Johnston.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to another installment of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I am Pat Johnston. And did you really expect dear leader Trump to give up the Epstein Files? I mean, he's got friends and neighbors on that list. And, well, maybe even himself. Now, is there a client list or is there not a client list? I'm not sure. But I'm guessing there's a good idea on who palled around with Jeffrey Epstein through all of those investigations. And we have a pretty good idea on the good many of powerful men in both politics and business who hung out with Epstein. And hear me out, if Bill Clinton was on that list, then so be it. I don't care. Come on, dear leader, release all those files, including a real explanation as to why the prison cameras suddenly were turned off at that time. Hey, Alan Dershowitz, you're such a Trump water boy now, but I seem to remember you claimed to stick up for those who didn't have the power to stick up for themselves. Certainly, all of the women who came forward and shared their stories of abuse by that disgusting Epstein and by his many friends when they were just girls, hey, they must be protected and believed, right? I mean, your trusted dear leader even said on tape that Epstein liked them young. Dear leader knew that. He knew that because he hung out with Epstein and considered the sick Epstein to be a good friend. I mean, this is from the same guy who says that he picks only the best people to surround him. Remember? He promised his gullible MAGA supporters that he'd release all of the documents, and then he let his idiot Attorney General Pam Bondi essentially hang herself by saying she had the Epstein client list on her desk. We now know that's a lie. Nothing to see here all of a sudden. Nothing to see here. All of a sudden, Pam Bondi and the FBI head Kash Patel, they both promised that there was much to see here. Now they say, hey, there's nothing to see here. We're all done. Let's move on. Hey, look at all these brown people we're kidnapping and beating up and then putting them into gulags. Pay attention to that. That's good. That's fun. Don't pay attention to Jeffrey Epstein. We don't care about that anymore. I mean, who are they protecting? And why are they now saying the billionaire pedophile who sex trafficked young girls all around the world killed himself? They weren't saying that before. And I'm just going to ask this simple question again. And I know many who have functioning brain cells out there can honestly answer this question. Who would you feel safe going into the bathroom with? Dear Leader Trump or House Speaker Mike Johnson? Our phone lines are open. It's not a stretch to say that dear leader's protecting himself, and he's also protecting many of his sick and twisted billionaire and millionaire oligarchs who would all get implicated in all this. You see, everyone, the elite class, they all travel in one exclusive group. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you'll be set free from their grip on power and choose a true working class agenda and choose those who actually believe in democracy and holding those who do wrong accountable. Accountability. I thought they used to be a big thing in MAGA world. As New York City Democratic nominee for mayor Zohran Mamdani said this week, we can fight for affordability and also against authoritarianism at the same time. Everyone, this Epstein story is important for two reasons. One, many women who were young girls at the time were statutorily raped and abused by older, richer, powerful men. And to say that there's nothing to see here, as the Trump regime is now telling us, is grotesque yet expected. And two, it shows us the elites, the untouchables, are always there to cover for one another. It's one elite political class, one elite political and business class, actually. We saw that last week when the MAGA Murder Budget passed through Congress, which I and many others knew was always going to happen. While we simpletons were arguing and fighting against MAGA Republicans on gutting Medicaid for working class families and the closings of rural hospitals, MAGA Republicans ensured they inserted nice little rubdowns for the rich, elite, untouchable corporate class in the MAGA murder budget. Okay, Pat, like what? What do they do? Well, they inserted bonus depreciation into the bill to fatten up their donors' pocketbooks. Now, what's bonus depreciation? Well, glad you asked. You see, they hope you little people out there, the ones who work 48 hours a week so that way you can take your kids to summer trips up to northern Michigan or maybe even a Disney World. They're hoping that you wouldn't notice these little perks for their friends, such as a $10 million private plane can now be written off as a $10 million deduction in the same year. As that left-wing rag known as Forbes reports, and I quote, "For someone interested in buying a jet, whether a new one or a used one, this is a very big deal," Matthew Beret, managing director of aviation at Oklahoma-based bank BOK Financial, said this week, saying he expects the mega bill's passage to, quote, "spur a lot of activity in aircraft sales." Oh, yes, yes, yes. That'll really spur on a lot of economic activity. Well, at least in aircraft sales. My word, how wonderful, how grand. How many of you in Wyandotte, Michigan, or Clare, Michigan, or Escanaba, Michigan, or Detroit, Michigan, how many of you voted for dear leader Trump because you wanted to ensure that people in his little untouchable bubble would get to write off a $10 million deduction for a private plane? How many of you voted for him for that reason? How come Michigan congressional MAGA Republicans like John Molinar, Jack Bergman, or Tim Wolberg, or John James, who's running for governor, or Lisa McClain, who danced to the Village People's YMCA as she and her fellow MAGA Republicans celebrated passing a bill handing out trillions to their billionaire donor class, how come they didn't campaign on needing to pass a bill that would give tax write-offs to billionaires for their private jets? I don't remember hearing that at all during any of their campaign speeches. Hey, maybe they did talk about them. Send those speeches to me if they did, all right? They told us that they were upset with inflation, but then they just signed off on major tax breaks to the entities responsible for greedflation for the last couple of years, the corporations. They said, here, corporations, congratulations on your greedflation. Congratulations on bilking the American consumer as much as you did right after the pandemic. Here you go. Here's more tax breaks. This is who MAGA Republicans work for. They don't work for the working class. And in order to give these huge socialist-like handouts to the billionaires, MAGA Republicans repeatedly punched the working class in the face by gutting nearly $1 trillion from Medicaid. $1 trillion. And if you think that's going to help pay for the billionaire and corporate tax cuts, a tax cut for the untouchables, think again. Because it's all a shell game, everyone. It's all a game because the MAGA murder budget raises the debt and deficits, which is why debt and deficits are all a game to the untouchable billionaire class. I mean, they will always lecture us and exclaim how we, the little people, can't expect to have Medicaid or universal health care or living wages or paid family leave or expanded child tax credits or a cleaner economy because, you see, it costs too much and we have to watch our debt. Except, though, when it comes to slashing taxes for the oligarchy and the oligarchy's planes. Then we don't have to worry about the debt whatsoever. And maybe that's why the American people don't care about the debt, because Republicans say, yeah, we were just joking about it. Whenever Democrats are in office, that's when we care about the debt. But when they're not in office, whatever. As long as we give our donor class billions of dollars in tax cuts, that's all that matters. I mean, this was always in the playbook for Project 2025, gut services and give to the untouchable class. Oh, and privatize too, because, hey, that always turns out well. We don't need government services to protect the American people. Are you silly? Do we really need, let's say, the National Weather Service and their woke ideology of warning people of cataclysmic storms that could lead to the deaths of fellow Americans? Do we really need the National Weather Service? Look, I'm not saying what happened in Texas, where a massive rainstorm led to flash flooding, causing the deaths of over 120 Americans, is the fault of dear leader Trump. He did not order the storm to hit there. But what's sick and twisted about the MAGA Republican mindset, the MAGA Republican philosophy, is how, in the age of climate change, which is causing stronger, more severe, and more frequent storms to hit across the entire country, not just in this area, not in just this region, not just this red state or blue state. It's happening all across the United States of America. How is it smart political and business sense to cut funding to the National Weather Service? I don't get it. Now, the National Weather Service seems to have tried to give significant warning to many of those in Texas when those storms were about to hit, which is all the National Weather Service could do. And some of those deaths, as we now know, maybe were going to happen anyway, since that all-girls camp didn't allow for cell phones. But at a time when we could be saving lives, just one more life, doesn't it make sense to put up sufficient warning signals that could be heard anywhere? Hell, I love watching the majors and championship golf, but whenever there's a lightning strike within 2 states of the tournament, the officials blast a horn telling everyone to get inside. And they do it pretty quickly, too. I mean, why can't we do that everywhere? Why can we not set up horns everywhere to ensure that people know when there is a dangerous storm or a tornado happening? And at a time of severe climate change causing severe storms, like the ice storm we saw in northern Michigan last spring, why the hell did the MAGA murder budget cut significant clean energy funding for clean energy building and clean energy jobs and double down on giveaways to yesterday's energy, coal and oil? And why the hell is the Trump regime gutting FEMA and making it a state issue? I mean, we've watched MAGA Texas Republicans bungle each and every climate change-related catastrophe throughout the years here, and they continue to double down on stupidity. The MAGA Texas Republican idiot and Governor Greg Abbott enthusiastically joined Dear Leader Trump's efforts to end FEMA. And, FEMA, it's that government agency that offers help and assistance to those who desperately need it during disasters. Yet Abbott and a bunch of MAGA Texas Republican idiots have been working with Trump to end FEMA. Unreal. Hey, Texas, you want those guys running your emergency services? Really? Can Senator Ted Cruz leave his vacation spot soon enough to help? I mean, that guy seems to always vacation everywhere but in Texas. But hey, can you blame him? You see, Michigan can be the anti-Texas, the anti-corruption state. And we can also be the clean energy state, the forward-thinking state. And we're trying to be by investing in our clean energy future, but the Trump regime is trying to slow that down. MAGA Republicans claim to be pro-life, but all of their actions prove otherwise. It's not really a Christian way to act either. But even more, MAGA Republicans in Michigan, such as John James and Lisa McClain and John Molnar, they are willing to end thousands of clean energy jobs in their state, all because their dear leader wants them gone, and they're doing it also because of his billionaire oligarchs. They're willing to hurt thousands of working-class Michigan families who depend on those jobs. They are now celebrating their work on hurting kids whose families depend on clean energy jobs in Michigan. As George Carlin said, and I was a kid when he said it too, and maybe this is where I started with some of my cynicism, but he said, it's an elite group, and you ain't invited. Look, we can fight for affordability and jobs while fighting against authoritarianism, but Democrats can't blur that line when it comes to the oligarchy, when it comes to the connected class, when it comes to the untouchable class. Look, I've had my criticisms of Michigan Democratic Attorney General Dana Nessel of late, and I've posted them on previous podcasts. But I'm giving the AG credit for this one. I'm going to give her credit for not only trying to protect consumers, but she's going after the untouchables, even if they are in her own party. I've been meaning to bring this up here in the past couple of weeks, but Nessel's office performed a warrant search on the Michigan Economic Development Corporation last month. We've been covering the MEDC a lot here when it comes to corporate subsidies or corporate welfare. The AG's office claimed that the Michigan Economic Development Corporation was trying to stonewall an ongoing investigation into Global Link International and its owner, businesswoman Faye Baydoun. Now, Michigan Advance's Ben Solis wrote in his story there about how it is alleged that Baydoun misused funds that were allocated to her from the then MAGA Republican majority in the Michigan legislature, but then signed off by by Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Baydoun, as Bridge Michigan's Simon D. Schuster reports, has been a longtime Democratic supporter and supporter of Governor Whitmer's. Schuster reports that Baydoun hosted a 2021 fundraiser for Governor Whitmer around the time that she claimed that the governor was helping to secure funding for the ill-fated project, that project for the Global Link International. Whitmer raised $13,500 at that fundraiser hosted at the Farmington Hills home of Baydoun, who personally donated more than $16,000 to the Democratic governor between two campaigns. And while Whitmer disclosed the fundraiser in a campaign filing, it was not known at the time that Baydoun was seeking funding from the state as she attempted to launch an international business accelerator. Now, Baydoun was able to secure a $20 million grant in 2022 that Republicans passed and that Governor Whitmer signed into law. And Baydoun then got herself a nice $550,000 salary at taxpayer expense to run this organization known as Global Link International. Now, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation is in charge of handing out all kinds of handouts to corporations as Michigan tries to convince companies to set up shop here. But as we have noted here many times, the amount of jobs compared to the amount of money that we've shelled out in corporate handouts doesn't add up. Not even close. And now, as Dana Nessel's office is pushing, there is some rampant corruption inside these hallowed halls of Lansing, with Republicans and Democrats all washing one hand after the other. I mean, it's tiresome, but good on Dana Nessel for going after these people, and especially going after Baydoun, who, thanks to some excellent Detroit news reporting, spent some $4,500 on a coffee maker and another $11,000 for a first-class ticket to Europe. You see, this is what people on the inside, they believe they can do this stuff, and they believe they are untouchable. Now, naturally, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation is trying to fight back against Nessel. No surprise there. But this is why working-class Michiganders and working-class Americans have lost trust in some of our institutions, and it's why we must try for a new way that puts the working-class agenda ahead of the business class. We have to pay attention to the working class. Populism is where the people are right now. They are tired of neoliberal policies. You see, this whole thing that I just told you about, it blurs the line between corruption of dear leader Trump and the corruption of Democratic insiders. The people tune out, and then they end up believing that someone like Donald Trump actually cares about them when he never does. Now, I'm not sure how Governor Whitmer will answer these questions if she decides to run for president, but she better get ready because she is going to get hounded on it big time. You see, we can fight for affordability. We can fight for the working class while also fighting against authoritarianism at the same time. It's not hard to do. We don't have to go down this failed neoliberal path that leaves so many on the outside feeling like they aren't being heard, and even worse, feeling like they don't have a seat at the table. Ivan Diaz is a Democratic Socialist who's running for the state Senate seat in the 29th District, which is around the Grand Rapids area. And he's a working class American, a working class Michigander whose parents were migrant workers in the Grand Rapids area, who then was able to get himself through school, who was able to get himself elected to the Kent County Board of Commissioners, who is a union guy and who now wants to enrich the lives of hardworking Michiganders in his area by becoming a state senator. Ivan Diaz is my guest coming up right after these words. You're listening to LOL,
a podcast devoted to intelligence, sanity, and freedom, or otherwise known as progressive politics. It's Left of Lansing with your host, Pat Johnston. Need to tell Pat where he's wrong? Or do you actually want to praise Pat? leftoflansing@gmail.com is how to reach him. Here's Pat.
And remember, if you'd ever like to reach me and further the discussion on any of the topics or any of the interviews that I've presented here on Michigan's premier progressive podcast, please do. It's leftoflansing@gmail.com. All right, I like to focus on some Michigan politics, which of course are being altered, also on what's happening on the national scale. And so I'd like to just talk about next year's election because, as I've been saying, the fight to blunt The fascism that we've been seeing pushed and celebrated by the MAGA movement isn't just about beating them at the ballot box. It's also about forging ahead with, I think, a new direction for the Democratic Party as well. We've been talking about that ever since last year's election, and I want to continue that discussion this week because the party's embrace of neoliberal economic policies, not to mention its embrace of, at times, MAGA messaging, has caused voters to turn towards the MAGA movement, or worse, for some to just not want to participate in the process whatsoever. And as we saw with Zoran Mamdani's blowout victory in the New York City mayoral Democratic primary race a couple of weeks ago, not only are Democratic base voters signaling that they want a bold economic vision, but they're also gravitating to those who will take the fight to the Trump regime's movements and policies. And like Zoran Mamdani, Ivan Diaz is a Democratic socialist. He is running to become the Democratic Party candidate for State Senate seat 29 here in Michigan, which covers parts of Grand Rapids, East Grand Rapids, Kentwood, and Wyoming. Mr. Diaz, thanks so much for taking a little time to be on Left of Lansing this week.
Hey, Pat, thanks. I appreciate it.
When did you decide to make this run for the state Senate seat, and what made you to decide that now is the time for you to make this run?
It's one of the questions that we get asked the most often, right? Any candidate for any really level of office. For me, my political experience really started the summer before my senior year of high school. That was summer of 2015 when Trump announced, when he was riding down that escalator, that Mexicans were crossing the border, bringing nothing but rapists and criminals. And since I attended a high school that was predominantly Latino, over 90% Latino here in Wyoming at Scott Free Public Schools, that image, that clip spread like wildfire. But I would really say it's, Trump was kind of my intro into politics. And soon after, I learned about a man named Bernie Sanders, who was also running for president as a Democratic socialist. And the policies that Bernie was fighting for just made a lot of sense to me. Again, this was my high school senior year, and so I wasn't really paying too much attention to politics, even though that was the first election that I was able to vote in. Really, it was after AOC won at the end of 2018 that I really started thinking to myself, I had started college by this point, and I had realized that the people who are often in these positions of power in government, they're not the best among us, as some people would have us believe. And so if I looked around and I saw somebody like AOC winning, a working class person, and I thought, if AOC can do it, why not me? I was involved in the redistricting process after the 2020 census. I realized that we were going to have fair state legislative maps in Michigan for the first time ever. And I decided to run for the state house at that point, for the 83rd House District, which covers Wyoming and Southwest Grand Rapids. And I was further away from graduating at that point. And so I, for various reasons, ended up switching to running for the Kent County Board of Commissioners, to which I was elected as the first Latino in Kent County history in 2022 for a 2-year term. But especially after I got elected to the county board and I had that experience working in local government and running helping to build a budget of hundreds of millions of dollars, I realized that the systems that we're all accustomed to working in, they're pretty much all broken and they're not working. Almost all of them were built decades ago, in the last century, actually, or last century, that is. And I realized that I had no interest in messing around or tinkering around with broken systems. My interest and my focus is on fixing those broken systems, reforming them if we have to, or starting from scratch if we have to. And so whether we're talking about our broken healthcare system, criminal justice system, education system, housing system, those are the focuses that I'm going to have when I'm in Lansing, and bringing down costs for working class people. As somebody who grew up working class, that will be my focus.
You mentioned how you were on the Kent County Board of Commissioners, and that's kind of where you learned, as you said, how things sometimes can get bogged down, I guess, even on a local level. But still, with your experience there, would you encourage others, especially younger people, to get more involved with their local politics, since politics are always local?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, that's frankly what I've been doing for years now at this point, but especially after last year's election where we saw Trump win. I can't remember if it was that very next Friday or the week after, I convened a meeting here in Grand Rapids with leaders from across the area, whether they're elected or not. I brought them together and I told them, if all of us here, we're all from different backgrounds, different beliefs, involved in different things. If we can agree on 2 things, then we can begin to transform the political system in Grand Rapids, in Michigan, and beyond. And those 2 things that we were able to agree on is that we are fighting and working towards universal healthcare, universal education, universal housing, and a clean and safe environment that we can pass down to future generations. And the second thing that we're agreeing to is that we need to elect working class, authentic, progressive candidates. Nobody in the room left after I said those things. Everybody agreed to it. And so that's what I've been focused on doing. I come from grassroots movements, grassroots organizing. And so even though I was stepping off of the Kent County Board of Commissioners, I knew that we had to have somebody filling in that role who also believed in this movement. And so I helped to recruit who is now Kent County Commissioner Nancy Morales, who was the first Latina elected to the Kent County Board of Commissioners. And that's the vision that I have. That's the movements, the type of movements that we need to build is, yes, stepping into positions of leadership, but also in a sense, building that bench and making sure that we're helping other people come in behind us.
Working class Michiganders.
Yes.
Something that, of course, as you heard in my open, I've been talking and hammering a lot here since this last election. As we are learning from all the data that has been coming in, working class, not just in Michigan, but throughout the country, has been tilting more towards voting MAGA Republican of late. And what was even more disturbing is that we saw with Gen Z voters, especially male voters, they voted in a little bit abnormally high numbers for the Trump campaign and for Republicans than they did before. Why do you think that is, and how would you try to work to reverse that trend, Ivan?
Yeah, I very much don't think as Michigan being either red, blue, or purple. A lot of people call us a purple state. Mm-hmm. I believe that we're a populist state. And by that, what I mean is that there's people, generally Michiganders, focus a lot more on economic policies. We don't really get too deep into the culture war stuff, as some people like to call it. I mean, and the proof of that is that in as many cycles, we have put in LGBTQ and reproductive health rights into state law and into our state constitution. Yep. What people want us to focus on is economic issues. And that is why I believe we've seen this for the last couple of cycles, this kind of switch back and forth between what some people would call right-wing leaders or other people may call neoliberal leaders who presented themselves as being populist, but who the voters realized were not really populist at all. And so by this, I mean things like raising the minimum wage to a living wage, helping improve our education system so that regardless of how much money somebody has, they receive the education they want, whether it's university or community college or a training program. These are the things that people want us to focus on. And so as far as Trump specifically, I know people who either sat out the last couple of elections or they went out and voted for the Democrat at the top of the ticket. And this past cycle, they voted for Trump. And I don't believe it's because they're racist or because they're stupid, as I saw so many elected people and people who work within the party say that the voters were stupid and that's why they voted for Trump. That's not why. It's because Trump told people that he was going to fight for them, working class people specifically, that he was going to go in and fix the swamp in DC. And they believed him. And they believed him because the Democratic Party for such a long time has drifted farther and farther to the right and has given all this lip service to voters before the elections. But then when the voters turn around and give them power, like we did in 2022 and gave them this trifecta for the first time in 40 years in Michigan, they didn't do enough. And so when people are this pressured economically, unfortunately, we see this all over the world. When people are pressured economically, they will begin to sacrifice other things. And that's why I am laser focused on fighting for working class families and the policies that will be able to help them in the long term and in the short term.
You said Democrats didn't do enough with their trifecta. Are you talking on a policy level or a messaging level or both?
I mean, both, right? But the belief that I have is that if you actually pass policies that will directly affect people in their everyday lives, you don't need to message them because they're going to feel it, you know? And so I'll give you one example, right? Is that when we got the stimulus checks or the stimmy checks, as us younger folk like to call them, people felt that immediately. And they still talk about it to this day. And a while back, I wasn't a firm believer in a UBI or a universal basic income, but the pandemic, I think, had a lot of lessons for us. And one of those lessons is that universal programs that people can feel, that people can see, and potentially even hold in their own hands That is what people remember, and that is what people want. And so, you can imagine a world where instead of having all of these 100 different programs that do this and that, if we just had a universal basic income, that would transform lives across Michigan. And so that is what I think we need to focus on, is actually passing these policies that actually help people, and not passing some mediocre policy that then we're going to have to convince people to actually help them.
All right, so Ivan, what would you state would be your top priorities if you became a state senator for the 29th district there?
Yeah, definitely. So, as I mentioned, housing, healthcare, education, and the environment. So, with healthcare, I don't think you can find a single person who won't admit that our healthcare system is broken. And that is because we have a healthcare system across this state, across this country, that is built around the profit incentive. It's built to make money for corporations. And I frankly believe that healthcare is a human right. And so I am a supporter of universal single payer healthcare. I know it can work at the national level. I believe that it could work at the state level. But even if we start off with a public option, that is something that I would support. And in fact, Representative Kerry Reagans has already introduced a bill that would create a public option at the state level. It's called MyCare.
Yep.
He introduced it last year, and that is what I would fight for as a state senator, because I believe that no matter how much money you have, no matter where you're working at, or if you're working, or what illness you have, you deserve a right to accessible and affordable healthcare. I used to be a union rep at CIU Healthcare Michigan. I used to work at Michigan United advocating for this very same bill. And the experiences that I have of working with either people who were denied healthcare by their private insurance company, or people who work within the healthcare system but are bogged down with having to deal with these insurance companies who only care about making money. It changes your life. It changes your perspective. And so I'm not here, again, to just mess around with the current broken system. I believe we need universal healthcare, and I believe we can do it. With housing, I believe housing is a human right. And that doesn't mean that everybody wants to own a piece of property. Some people are very comfortable and okay with being renters, but we still need to reduce costs for people. So I would support getting rid of the state level ban that bans stabilized rent throughout the state. That doesn't mean that I would impose some kind of state level policy. It just means that I would get rid of the ban. So if a local community like Grand Rapids or like Wyoming or Kentwood or Granville want to pass a rent stabilization ordinance, they should be able to do so. I believe in giving grants for down payments for first-time home buyers. I believe in having and providing low interest loans to first-time home buyers, people who are interested in buying homes, but who can't do so because of the current interest rates. But we also need a lot of housing to be built, right? I mean, just in the Grand Rapids area alone, the most recent study said that we need almost 40,000 housing units in the next couple of years to be built. And we're nowhere near to that, to building that many. And so we do need to change policies around zoning, around helping home builders. We need to increase supply, and we also need to help the people who are struggling now. And so those are the things that I would focus on around housing. Around education, I believe that education is a human right. And so regardless of if somebody wants to go just get a 2-year associate's degree or a 4-year degree at a public university or a master's degree, or if they want to go into an apprenticeship with a union, they should be able to do that. And we need people to do that because we need people to work in our schools, in our hospitals, in our nursing homes. We need educated people. So I would make our public colleges and public universities tuition free across the state of Michigan. And I would invest in our K through 12 schools because, again, I graduated from Godfrey Public Schools who had part of its roof collapse in the summer of 2019 and spent years having to pass a new millage to get that roof fixed. And this is a very low income school district in Michigan. And I just can't help but wonder if this had happened in a much wealthier school district, if they would have gone through that same experience. And we need to protect our environment. So I support polluter pay. I support forcing companies and billionaires who pollute our environment to force them to clean up after themselves. I support rapidly transitioning us to renewable and green energy, true renewable and green energy. And I support, frankly, getting rid of the pipelines underneath our lakes, because one of the top, if not the top attraction to Michigan is our beautiful environment, our beautiful public spaces. And if a disaster were to happen that would pollute those waterways, it would be devastating for our state. I do support getting rid of Line 5, and I would do all I could to make sure that we have sustainable and reliable energy sources. And that includes making DTE and consumers' energy stop giving politically to lawmakers in the short term. But in the long term, I don't see why our utilities should be owned by investors. And so I would support making those into fully publicly owned and publicly controlled utilities.
Yeah, so that you would back, I think there is maybe a movement or to get a proposal on the ballot that would ban or at least limit spending by utilities like DTE and consumers. Is that something that you would back?
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. And you were mentioning your platform there with education. Of course, you know that would be on the complete opposite side of Betsy DeVos. Are you prepared to take on her wrath and the spending that she would take against you if you happen to become the Democratic nominee?
Definitely. I'm not scared of DeVos or any other billionaire. And I've not only said this, I've acted on it. When I was a Kent County commissioner, I pushed back against some of these huge projects that are being built in the Grand Rapids area right now, whether it's the amphitheater, the soccer stadium, a future aquarium. Look, I'm a fan of soccer, right? I love soccer. I was watching the game just yesterday with Mexico versus the United States. But I know for a fact that there's a lot of talent in our communities, a lot of good young soccer players that, if given the opportunity, could become worldwide stars someday. It's not just I who believes this. It was community members themselves who were expressing as much in the town halls. And so we believed that if the public was paying for the soccer stadium, then the public should benefit from the soccer stadium. I was one of the few, I think only one of 21 or two of 21 commissioners who voted against that project because I didn't believe it benefited us enough. I pushed back against the so-called Three Towers project that the DeVos family, and I think the Van Andel family, is also building in the Grand Rapids area. Again, you just heard me say that I know that we need more housing, and we need housing at all access levels, at all price points. But this project, if I'm not mistaken, is going to receive hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies from the state of Michigan. And I was simply saying, and many of us were saying, okay, if you're going to receive all of this money in public dollars, then you should have affordable housing built into the project. And they absolutely refused to do this. And so when I get to Lansing, I am going to reform the way that public-private partnerships are done in Michigan. I believe in them. I support them. But I believe that if public dollars are going to be spent, then the public needs to benefit.
So I'm gathering then from what you just said that maybe if you became state senator, you would want to try to find ways to reform or at least change the way that it seems like Michigan has done business, especially in Lansing here for quite some time through different administrations in Lansing, where we just continue to give hundreds of millions of dollars to corporate subsidies. I'm gathering that you would like to see a change in that and a more focus on community spending.
Yes, I mean, frankly, I'm always suspicious of giving tax breaks to billionaires and millionaires. They don't need them. But if for whatever reason they want to argue the point that they need them to build a certain project, hey, I'm all ears. Because again, like I said, we need thousands of housing, tens of thousands of housing units in Grand Rapids, in the Grand Rapids area alone. But I believe that the way that it's been done in the past and even now, it's not working. We have all of these so-called incentives for corporations who are saying they're going to bring high-paying jobs to our neighborhoods, to our communities. Years go by and those promises are not completed. They don't come through for us. Mm-hmm. I believe in reforming public-private partnerships, but I also believe that if we can't find a trusted corporate partner, private partner to do something, there's no reason why we can't do it ourselves through a unit of government, whether that's building public housing or doing something else.
Ivan, before I forget, I just want to go back to healthcare. You mentioned that you are for universal healthcare. You mentioned that you're for State Representative Carrie Ryan-Ganz's My Care proposal, and Representative Ryan-Ganz was on here just a couple of weeks ago talking about that proposal, amongst other things. I'd like to ask you, though, a question just maybe on values and on messaging when it comes to healthcare. Michigan's United States Senator Alyssa Slotkin, Democrat, gave a speech the other week in which she said she wants to push for a public option for Obamacare or for the Affordable Care Act. She said some may call that incrementalism, but that she calls that a real bold strategy. I know it's on a national level, but still, I mean, we're still talking about universal healthcare, whether it is on a national level or a state level. And I was wondering if you agreed with what Senator Slotkin said there or where you think she was wrong.
Yes, I'm going to be very clear in saying that I support universal single-payer healthcare.
Yeah.
I'm running for the state senate, for the Michigan State Senate, not the United States Senate. If
I understand.
I was already a United States senator, I would not play games with a public option. We need universal single payer healthcare, whether you want to call it Medicare for all or something else. The only reason why I'm open to a public option at the state level is the question around funding. I am still a believer that if we tax the rich like DeVos and Van Andels in Michigan, I believe that we could still find a way to build a universal single payer healthcare system in Michigan and eventually cooperate with other states who are also moving in this direction. That's my starting point.
Yeah.
But if I was not able to get my colleagues in the Senate and in the legislature as a whole to move towards single payer, and they told me we don't have the votes for single payer, but we could do a public option, then I would support a public option. I have no doubt, though. I mean, the studies have already been done and they prove my point that single payer is definitely possible at the United States level, at the federal level. And so, I mean, again, the question is around counting votes, but the only reason I believe for why a United States senator wouldn't support single payer is if they're owned by the health insurance corporations. And so I'll leave that to the public to decide on whether or not they believe Senator Slotkin is one of those.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good point. And I didn't think about it that way, but I see what you're saying, why maybe pushing for a public option here in the state is probably more feasible on a vote counting way. But when you're looking at this nationally and on a federal level, that it can be done probably easier on the federal level, no doubt about it. And here's the other thing. It's also a popular issue in poll after poll after poll. Americans, by strong majority, say they want universal health care. Anyway, Ivan, we only have a couple of moments left. I noticed on your Facebook page that you posted the following statement here, and I'd just like to read it. You said the Trump government cuts are already killing people around the country. Many of our current politicians in Lansing failed to Trump-proof Michigan so that we could protect our working families from the most dangerous president ever. We will not repeat those mistakes. Ivan, what do you mean when you say that politicians in Lansing failed to Trump-proof the state?
What I mean, right, is a lot of these policies that I just mentioned, we could have passed those during the last 2 years when we had the first Democratic trifecta in the last 40 years. I mean, again, I graduated from high school right before the first Trump administration. We knew that there was a good chance that he was going to be reelected, but yet many of the politicians who are in Lansing, who were in Lansing, lacked the vision and frankly, the courage to do what was needed for working class families and to stop messing around the edges of broken systems. And so these policies that I just mentioned, we could fund them at the state level so that regardless of who's in the White House and regardless of who controls Congress, these policies will continue and will be stood up with state level resources. And so that's what I mean, is that frankly, our federal government is broken. Whether we want to talk about gerrymandering or we want to talk about the filibuster or whether we want to talk about a presidential office that is way too powerful, a Congress that has given up way too much of its power, or whether we want to talk about the rampant corruption of politicians who are bought and owned by corporations and whichever billionaire or millionaire is donating to their campaigns. The system is broken. And so that's why I'm running for a state level office for the Michigan State Senate and not some office in DC, because I believe that these policies that I just talked about, we can pass them at the Michigan state level and we can reinforce them so that, again, regardless of who is in the White House or in Congress, our systems and our people are protected. And so that's going to be my focus when I get to Lansing. And I hope that my colleagues do the same.
Okay, this is actually my last question because you tout yourself as a democratic socialist. I agree with many of the economic progressive policies of democratic socialism, but how would you describe democratic socialism to some voters in your district who may not know much about it? Because let's face it, Ivan, MAGA Republicans and the corporate media, they combine to try to make that term sound real insidious and anti-American. Yeah. So what do you tell voters who'd say, what's that all about, this democratic socialism?
I would simply say a couple of terms and they would understand it immediately. Democratic socialism is Social Security. It's Medicare. It's Medicaid. Democratic socialism is also the subsidies that these corporations receive. It's just socialism for the rich. Democratic socialism, to me, simply means that all of us, everyone in the country, deserves a chance to have a long, prosperous, happy, full life. And so to me, it simply means that we all receive an equal opportunity and that we all have the resources to actually act on those opportunities. This doesn't mean, being a democratic socialist to me, doesn't mean that you're going to round up all of the rich people, as some people were saying after Bernie almost won the presidential primary a couple of years back.
Right.
It simply means that we should all have the same opportunity to live long lives and to contribute back to society, to the economy. Especially given my experience in the Kent County Board of Commissioners, for a lot of conservatives, they love to talk about these things as if they were handouts or as if we're saying that they're going to be free, when that's not what I'm saying at all. None of these things are going to be free, but there are much better, more efficient ways to build these systems so that we all benefit and so that nobody is left behind.
Ivan, if people would like to become part of your campaign or would just like to learn more about you and your platform, where should they go?
They can go to voteivandiaz.com. They can donate there. They can email me there. They can sign up to be a volunteer, to be part of our community governing committee. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, and will soon be on TikTok and Instagram. So I look forward to connecting with the voters and here in District 29 and continuing to build a movement that will transform our political life in Michigan and the society that we have built over the years.
Awesome. All right. Ivan Diaz, candidate to become the next state senator for Michigan's 29th district. Thanks so much for being on and sharing your viewpoints and goals, and mostly for also just trying to spread a bold economic populist message. And because of that, I'd love to have you back on to see how you're doing in your Senate race here in the near future, if that'd be okay with you.
Definitely. I'd love to come back.
A podcast that believes in using common sense to move Michigan into the future. And by common sense, we mean progressive sense. We've all seen what 40 years of Republican leadership did to this state, and we refuse to go back. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. You can follow Pat on Facebook or X, Pat still calls it Twitter, or on the Gram, Threads, and also on YouTube. Subscribe to the show on YouTube and wherever else you listen to your podcasts. All right, I think we gave Pat enough time to catch his breath. Let's get back to it. Here's Pat Johnston.
Special thanks to Ivan Diaz for appearing on the show this week, and I will have Ivan back on the show here soon because I'd like to help his campaign as much as possible, at least help him get his message out as much as possible. Look, he's probably not going to get much Democratic establishment help, and that might not be such a bad thing. One of the reasons why things are as bad as they are now is because Democratic Party leadership and Democratic Party consultants led us down this path, a path that gave us the MAGA movement. If there was one part the resistance got wrong back during the first Trump term, it was that many believed that people just wanted to get back to neoliberalism politics. And no, they did not want any more neoliberalism politics. They wanted something new. And for some reason, Democratic Party leaders and consultants, they thought that voters wanted the old ways of the weak and ineffective Democratic Party. No, that wasn't working anymore. And Ivan Diaz and other young Democratic socialists are pushing for a new way and doing it in a bold way. And that's what this week's Left of Lansing Last Call is all about. In the interview here, Ivan said that Michigan Democrats didn't do enough with their power. And I have to agree with that assessment. Look, I will admit, I sometimes tried to give the Lansing Democratic leadership the benefit of the doubt sometimes and not going full force with a bold populist agenda in 2023 and 24. I sometimes even argued that, hey, sometimes getting half is better than nothing. Well, guess what? I was dead wrong. I was dead wrong about that, and I will admit that. And I betrayed not only you, the listener, but I betrayed my own progressive economic belief that going hard on populism was always going to be the winning ticket. And watching how the Democratic leadership in the State House did not pass polluter pay, for example, while putting the interest of corporate donors on the forefront, and this was after losing the working class vote to Trump and MAGA Michigan Republicans, that's when I realized how disastrously wrong I had been. And it didn't get better for Democrats who, after losing the state house, decided to join with MAGA Republicans in gutting the state's minimum wage and paid sick leave increases that were scheduled to take place this year. Now, not every Democrat voted in favor of that. Of course not. In fact, a majority of Democrats did not vote in favor of that. And I want that to be clear. But enough did. And it was alarming how they thought that was the lesson to be learned from the last election. But what's got me all fired up is how Trump and the MAGA Congress just passed the MAGA Murder Budget. And what's also got me fired up is how the Michigan House Speaker, Matt Hall, is moving right ahead with his threat to shut down the state government. I mean, you see, MAGA, they seem to have no problem moving ahead with their bold, of course, misguided and disastrous anti-worker, anti-populist, and pro-fascist agenda. Yet Democrats complain that they can never, ever be that bold and they can never, ever follow through on their campaign promises. Why not? And as Ivan Diaz said, why not press for universal health care or a universal basic income? Hell, I mean, that's basically what we just did for the oligarch class in the MAGA murder budget. As New York City's Zoran Mamdani is showing, going bold and fighting for a bold economic progressive agenda is popular, and it gets the people on your side. It gets them excited. And populism is also authentic. For some reason, some Democrats just refuse to see the truth that's staring them right in the face. And it's why some of them will soon be out of jobs, and it's why some of them will lose to those with strong populist policies. Populism wins.
You're listening to the Left of Lansing podcast. The music you're hearing is by Wanderbeats. To hear the latest project, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site. Now back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
That's going to do it for this edition of The Left of Lansing. Follow Left of Lansing on YouTube, where you'll not only get all the episodes along with the Monday musings and the Friday shorts, but you'll see videos and commentary from me that you won't hear on the podcast. Yeah, that's right. You actually get to see me there a little bit. So subscribe if you can, because subscriptions are very important for us here in podcast land. Also, subscribe to the show wherever you're listening and give it a good 5-star review, please. Special thanks to Ivan Diaz for appearing on the show this week, and I will link to his campaign wherever you are listening, so please check it out. And while things are horrible, no doubt, at least the Detroit Tigers are putting a smile on my face a little bit. I mean, this just might be the best Tigers team that I can remember in quite some time, and I am thoroughly enjoying it. I hate that the All-Star break is coming, because that means no Tigers baseball for the next 5 days. However, congrats to CMU's Zach McKinstry for making the American League All-Star team, and thanks for just being an awesome story for the Tigers, Zach, and let's hope you can take it all the way to the World Series. Go Tigers, and go fire up chips. Until next time, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
The Left of Lansing podcast was produced by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and hosted by, yes, Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. And thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. Remember to visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to the Left of Lansing podcast.